Hello, everybody, and welcome. Today, I am presenting you with the tragic crash of Eastern Airlines Flight 401, which happened in 1972. My name is Kirill Kleymenov, and this is part of the Avia 572 Applied Human Factors course for Liberty University. Today, we'll explore how human factors like complacency, distraction, and communication failure played a role, and I'll share some biblical insights on some ethical decision making that we can do. So let's get started. For the introduction, today we will look at the unfortunate incident that occurred on December 29th, 1972, involving Eastern Airlines Flight 401. For the content, we will look at the aircraft pilot role and the aircraft crew role, and we will also see why understanding human factors matters, and look at an incident preview, and look at why the crash happened. Well, it was because of a simple problem that was overlooked, unfortunately. So, for the incident overview and timeline, on December 29th, 1972, Eastern Airlines Flight 401 crashed into the Florida Everglades while on approach to Miami. This resulted in 101 fatalities and numerous injuries. The tragedy occurred because the flight crew became so fixated on a faulty landing gear indicator light, failing to notice that the autopilot had been disengaged and that the aircraft was steadily descending. As Yildiz 2024 notes, and the importance of situational awareness often becomes evident when it is lacking or deficient, marking Flight 401 as a textbook example of how a minor distraction leads to such a catastrophe. Some of the key events in this timeline include the night approach to Miami happening first, then the pilot focusing on troubleshooting rather than monitoring their altitude, and then the crew focusing on the landing gear malfunction rather than noticing that the autopilot had been disengaged. This led to the altitude being lost and their aircraft crashing into the swamp in the Florida Everglades. So, what were some of the human factors involved? Well, obviously one was complacency. After flying many similar routes, the crew's routine may have led them to trust the aircraft systems way too much. They became too fixated on troubleshooting the gear indicator, classic, where their attention was diverted from monitoring altitude and other critical flight instruments. Additionally, there was a breakdown in communication. The crew members just weren't sharing their concerns or alerting each other to anything. Instead, they were overly focused on solving the mechanical issue, which at that point became the least of the problems. This is a dangerous trap that many of us need to be aware of, because remember, like Yildiz 2024 said, situational awareness becomes evident when it is lacking or deficient, as seen in this tragic crash in December 1972. Obviously, complacency wasn't the last or the first human factor involved in this incident, because there were also a couple more. One to be named is overconfidence, second is distraction, third is situational awareness, and obviously fourth is communication. So now let's analyze human factors from a Christian perspective. Like I already said, complacency, distraction, communication failure, and situational awareness were some of the biggest contributing human factors. But how did these really influence the outcome? Well, they delayed the recognition of the altitude loss and caused misjudgment, which led to the eventual crash. Proverbs chapter 11, verse 3 tells us, the integrity of the upright guides them, but the unfaithful are destroyed by their duplicity. New International Version, 1978. For the application, we should maintain wisdom and humility to recognize personal limitations, and we should conduct regular self-examination and accountability. So for some of the discussion prompts, well, how could humility and open communication have prevented this incident? In what ways can biblical principles influence us in our safety, especially if you are in this scenario? How does servant leadership help us be more safe and accountable? And how might reliance on God's wisdom and humility have changed the crew's response or responses? Well, where do we go from here? Perhaps this is your first time hearing of this incident. This is definitely one of the first times I heard of it, but the crash was headline news around the world. It was the first ever jumbo jet to crash and produced the largest number of deaths in U.S. civil aviation history. which put enormous pressure on the National Transportation Board, NTSB, to find out what happened to the most sophisticated jet on the planet. O'Brien and Bullshafter, 2020, para 11. This incident teaches us this. Vigilance, humility, and integrity are not just good ideas, but they are virtues that can save lives. Trusting God's wisdom and staying humble helps us stay alert and responsible, no matter how routine the day may seem. Thank you so much for being here with me today. I've included the sources for this lesson, including the report on Flight 401 and some biblical references. This will help us understand more on human understanding of human factors and the biblical truth to help us become safer and more accountable professionals in aviation. Thank you so much for engaging with this case study with me, and I encourage you to reflect on how humility and divine wisdom can influence your decisions and leadership in aviation. Let us always strive to be faithful with responsibility. Thank you so much, and have a blessed day.